Good morning. Welcome. Hi, I'm Finlay Johnson of Mobility Ways, and you have joined the latest in the Mobility Ways Thought Leaders webinar series, which today is called How to Win Government Contracts Through Emissions Reporting. And today we're going to be focusing on the government's PPN 0621 policy, which means that all government procurement contracts over 5 million must include 5 categories of Scope 3 emissions reporting, which includes commuting emissions. But more broadly, PPN 0621 has significantly impacted how certain government contracts are awarded in the UK, with suppliers required to submit detailed carbon reduction plans, which demonstrate their commitment to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And this is a crucial factor in determining suppliers' eligibility to proceed in the tender process. So today we're here to find out more about it, what it means, what the implications are, and how what best practice in consideration of PPN 0621. And we're joined by John Rastrick and Charlotte Hallowell from Flotilla. So bit of an introduction then. So John Rastrick is CEO and founder of Flotilla. John's principal career for 20 years was as a private equity professional, which includes being a UK sector head, a regional head, an investment committee, a valuations committee, an advisory board member. Today, John is founder and CEO of Flotilla, which is a B Corp company, really there to help build better businesses. And Flotilla's AI technology platform and advisory services support business leaders to design and embed commercially wise, data-led, impactful climate action and implement personalised, responsible business strategies. Now, Flotilla's proprietary tech platform and their methodologies endorsed by the United Nations, and consequently their portfolio includes a number of leading fintechs, asset managers, advisory bodies, NGOs, public sector bodies, tech and financial service companies, law firms, both UK and internationally, accountancy and surveying practices, healthcare groups, PE and debt funds. So, really broad portfolio. Now, John himself is an investor and the independent non-exec director at JMG Group, which is a high growth premium commercial insurance business backed by Sonova LP. Also a non-exec director at Vida Healthcare, an award-winning specialist dementia care group. And John has been an advisor to Leeds University, Nexus Innovation Centre, and a BVCA and Dealmakers Awards judge. Also been chair and NED on a variety of company boards, ranging from startups, global businesses, but also a qualified corporate lawyer and practiced in 2 international law firms. So quite the CV there, John. And it's joined today by Charlotte Hallowell, sustainability consultant at Flotilla. And Charlotte is a chartered accountant with a background in regulated industries and supports Flotilla clients in navigating the complexities of carbon accounting, ESG reporting, and indeed their path to net zero. Now, Charlotte retrained as a carbon accountant by completing advanced greenhouse gas footprinting courses with IEMA, and integrates her financial knowledge with environmental expertise. Very much committed to translating regulations into clear, actionable steps for clients, and driven by a desire to make a positive impact. So great lineup for you today. But before I hand over to John and Charlotte, just a quick bit of housekeeping. So the format of today's session is going to be a presentation from John and Charlotte, which will take us up to about 11:30. We're then going to move into a question and answer session, which will last about 30 minutes, and we'll aim to have you wrapped up about midday. So at the bottom of your screens, you'll see a chat box and a Q&A tab. We would love it for the purpose of the chat. We can get some conversation flowing. If you could perhaps add your name, maybe a link to your LinkedIn profile, what your core interests are, that would be fantastic. But if you've got specific questions for John or Charlotte, or you have questions about commuting and how that factors into PPN 0621, which I'll aim to jump in on as well, then please add those to the Q&A tab. And if you put your question in there, we'll aim to get that over to John and Charlotte in the Q&A session. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to John and Charlotte now. So over to you guys.
Thank you, Finlay. Thank you for that kind introduction, comprehensive introduction. I didn't realise either Charlotte or I.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us okay?
Just to check.
Just to check.
I can hear you fine.
Perfect. Yeah, it just came up that we were muted. Yeah, as Finlay said, today's about supporting businesses, supporting NHS and supporting central government and local authorities with their requirements to provide carbon reduction plans and to do so in a cost-effective but very premium, high-quality way. And it's a big part of what we do. So yeah, delighted to be here. I think you've had the introductions on both Charlotte and I. I bet you're probably thinking as attendees, gosh, this is going to be really dry. I've got a corporate lawyer, a chartered accountant, and an investor. So we'll try not to make it too dry for you, and hopefully make it very useful in the context of the subject matter today. So just by way of background, if we can turn to the next slide, please. Flotilla was founded in the early 2020, and we founded it because primarily we felt that there was a need within the market to drive outcomes, reductions in climate change for the supply chain, for the SME community, and we now 5 years on from 2019, we basically support large enterprises, asset managers, large institutions with their own carbon footprinting and embedding sustainability strategies, but also their supply chains, their portfolio companies, or their client bases. Because we work utilizing our own proprietary technology that we've built over multiple years, which enables highly efficient data provision using APIs and using questionnaires and support with provision of energy data. But we also combine that with people like Charlotte, high quality consultants that we've got as a team as well. And we think it's a combination of those two things that are really pivotal to support supply chains. Usually there's one individual that's been handed ESG, and they usually have had limited training. They've got lots of other things on their plate. So to make this simple to adopt, high quality, and embedded, the combination of that technology piece and premium consultancy is really, really important. So to build that out, we've worked with large academic institutions such as the Leeds University, the Priestley Centre for Climate Futures, and we're fortunate enough to be had our methodology reviewed and approved by Priestley, and Professor Piers Forster, who's the current chair of the UK Climate Committee, has also seconded members of his team to authenticate what we do. And we're a B Corp, which really matters to us. We're accredited with science-based targets, IEMA, and these other institutions, which hopefully give you some confidence about our platform and our approach. In terms of client base, we work with businesses that have 3-4 people, that small architects, to global businesses that operate in 52 countries. We have a real specialism in healthcare, but also in public sector. But we work for many businesses and work on a pretty much sector agnostic basis. So yeah, next slide, please. So in terms of coming back to basics, why are we talking about net zero, and why is it so important as part of the tender processes for central government and NHS contracts? Well, the government has put into legislation that the UK will reduce its carbon emissions by half by 2030 and at least by 90% by 2050. Now, that's a legal commitment. And when you are participating in those tender processes, you need to align with that commitment as part of that tender piece when you measure your footprint and implement your net carbon reduction plan. So the focus today is around net zero, and we'll come on and talk a little bit more about the scopes. And the orientation for most organizations is around net zero, moving away from that carbon neutrality. The big part of this also relates to nature-based biodiversity, and we can touch upon that, but that's another area that's really, really important to strategically embed within your strategies when you're thinking about net zero as well. So just thought it was worth touching upon that starter point in terms of focus. So yeah, next slide, please. So what is PPN 0621? PPN 0621 is basically the commitment that suppliers to central government, to the NHS, need to comply with to tender. And that means a measurement of their scopes 1 and 2 and partially scopes 3, and also putting in place a carbon reduction plan, which is publicly stated on your website, and which over time you need to evidence that you have reduced your footprint in line with your strategy. So this is a really, really fundamentally important part of any sector, that any business operates within these sectors. And it's really, really important that people comply with this. And the levels of compliance depend on the contract you're tendering for. So if it's the NHS, this is applicable for contracts actually over £10,000, and for central government, it's for contracts over 5 million. And it's anticipated that will change over time to reduce. The responsibilities and the bandings of what you're required to do varies depending upon the value of those contracts. So, in principle, this is not a percentage score system. This is a ticket to play system, if you like. So, for any business that operates here, the way we like to talk about this is actually, this is about protecting your market opportunity, protecting your revenue, and providing you in the best place to at least retain the business that you're seeking to retain, as well as doing the right thing by putting in place your appropriate carbon reduction methodology and plans and delivering that over time. Next slide, please. I think, Charlotte, you're going to touch upon, in practice, how we do this.
Yeah, so this slide is really just about the practicalities of how you actually go about calculating a carbon footprint. And, whether that's with Flotilla, you're doing it internally, or you're going to engage somebody else, there's always going to be these common themes. So really starting off with that business data, that business understanding, making sure that we understand, where all those emission sources are within the business to make sure that we capture that kind of complete picture, that complete footprint. And then we'll also consider things like the financial data. So spend particularly on some of the supply chain categories, making sure that we understand, what's being spent where. If you were to work with Flotilla on something like this, we have integrations into the finance system, so we can pull all that out automatically. And then we also start to capture some wider data, so kind of more specific activity data, particularly for stuff like the employees. So when you work with Flotilla, and a lot of other companies will do this too, think about surveying those employees to understand, how they commute to work, how often they commute to work, how far they commute to work. All this stuff starts to build out a picture of that employee commuting, which makes up a big part of a corporate footprint. Similarly thinking about specific supplier data or travel data that you have available for maybe business travel. Any kind of data that you've got, we'll start to use. And I think it really is about kind of getting started. So it's not about getting the most accurate data from day one. It's getting started with what you've got, and then we can build upon that in future periods, which comes down to kind of that action plan when we're talking about kind of in the context of the carbon reduction plan, improvements over time that can be on data as well as on decarbonisation. So we take all that data out, and from that you'll get a carbon footprint, which is split into the 3 scopes, which is really just a way of categorizing those emissions. And you might have come across these scopes before. So you've got scope 1, which is really just the direct emissions from sources that you own or control. And this is really thinking about those things that you really directly influence. So any, vehicles that you own in a company that you're driving around, you're burning that fuel. If you've got a gas office in the boiler, a gas boiler in the office that you control, that's you burning those fuels. Scope 2 is a little bit different. It's kind of indirect emissions. In practice, this is generally just any purchased electricity. So it's not you that's burning the coal in the power station, but you are still benefiting from those emissions from that consumption. So that sits within your Scope 2. And then Scope 3 is really just everything else. So it's really the biggie. It's normally 90+% of a carbon footprint because there is so much in there, and that's everything from the employee commuting and the business travel, the purchase goods and services, any waste, any logistics, it all sits there in that Scope 3. So generally we tend to break that down into the 15 Scope 3 categories, which we've got in an appendix which we'll send around after, but we won't kind of run through in detail right now. But for PPN, you're really looking at the waste, the business travel and the commuting, and any kind of specific logistics you've got. And that's kind of the requirement for PPN 0621.
I think it's a really, for me, a really important graph here because, for our clients, there's three factors that they think about. There's one which is knowledge. This is new to a lot of organizations. So being able to articulate, look, this is what the requirement is, this is how we do it, and then having confidence within the process that they can do it in a cost-effective and in a simple way is really, really important. It's the biggest barrier to entry because most people are sat there going, look, we're really busy, we've got lots of challenges around cost of living, we've got lots of obligations within our markets already. How do we feel confident that we can do this simply and at a high quality? And part of that is knowledge, part of that is systems, and that part of that is specialist consultants that can help. And the next piece then is, once we've got that data, it's making wise, credible decisions which are aligned with the strategies of those commercial strategies, aligned with the value strategies of those businesses. And that ensures that you can set a framework that works on a customized basis for that business. And then you can get access to really high quality partners to help you execute those plans efficiently and effectively with smart decisions. And that's where, we can support with access to service providers, policy providers, people like Mobility Ways, because travel is a huge area where you can reduce your footprint, you can reduce your costs. And it's about feeling confident about those choices. So, breaking it down and using the right tools, the right partners, the right approach to build that trust and turn it into an advantage is really, really important because that enables people to feel that they're not just being compliant, they're doing something that they believe in and they feel confident that they can execute well. Next slide, please.
So this is then given a bit of context to that commitment that you're going to have to make. So, for PPN 0621, but generally for kind of any tender requirements, they're going to ask what that net zero target is. So this is just giving a bit of a pathway about how we start to think about that, how we plot it out. So we'll take that carbon footprint that we measured, and that would be your baseline year. That's a kind of a representative of your starting point, where you were at the start of this journey on that business as usual activity basis, covering your scopes 1, 2, and 3. And I think it's important to note that, your baseline year, kind of the actual footprint might change over time. So there's loads of different reasons why we might need to recalculate that footprint. If you change your methodology and we actually get some better data, if you kind of acquire any businesses or divest, if the business changes, there's kind of a multitude of different reasons why we would restate that footprint, and that's completely normal and kind of part of best market practice. So even though you've got this baseline year to begin with, it might not necessarily stay at that exact same tonnage. It might not be 960 tonnes for the remainder of your net zero journey. So just want to be aware of upfront. And from that, we're then looking ultimately to reduce by 90% across all 3 scopes by 2050 at the latest. But there's a lot of different reasons why you might want to pick a different year. The NHS themselves, they're looking for 2045. So there's loads of different reasons why you might want to pick a different target. And we would work with you to make sure that we set something that's actually achievable and realistic, and that you can get to comfortably without just kind of finger in the air, plucking a number out just to put it on your tender document. So we would work with you to determine that. And we would also think about, then that interim target. So for SBTI, it's generally around 2030. Within the PPN document, it looks for that kind of 5-year commitment, just to almost keep eyes on the prize. So because net zero, by 2050, that's so far away, just to kind of keep that constant action, that constant thought, you're looking to reduce by 50% generally to align to SBTI there. And I think it's worth noting, that this is kind of the corporate net zero standard. There are SME pathways. So there's ways that you can do it if you're a smaller business, still remain aligned to the science, starting to think about intensity metrics. There's no requirement on scope 3 sometimes for SMEs, depending on your size. So there is flex. It depends on the size of the business and kind of what that starting point is as to what it is that you have to achieve.
And just to add a little bit to that, this can be very daunting for businesses. And so, actually, when you break down that constituent reduction per annum, it sort of turns, it's 6-7% per annum. So that actually feels quite achievable. And the way we recommend businesses look at this is actually what's within their absolute control, i.e. around their own operational footprint, that is capable of being done and aligned with their other strategic priorities. Secondly, what's within their influence. So that's moving perhaps outside of your operational footprint towards your supply chain, and how you can, approach a strategy around your supply chain where you can influence certain suppliers, because there will be other suppliers you can't influence. So, people that are working with Amazon or Google and they're a small SME, they can't drive influence there. But around some of their suppliers where they have direct relationships, they're aligned strategically, they know there's an opportunity, that's where they should focus. And the final piece is what is outside of their sphere of influence and what needs to decarbonize over time ahead of 2050. And that may be the grid. That may be about some of these large enterprises putting in place their own strategies to decarbonize themselves. So it's not all on the individual institution, the individual SME. It's around a smart strategy that's part of their broader commercial goals, but also recognizes what's within their sphere of influence. So I feel that's it's an important theme to set when you're building out your frameworks of how you want to build your carbon reduction plan. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've developed over time is really working with partners, whether it's enterprises, whether it's combined authorities, whether it's the NHS, whether it's asset managers, is how do we empower them to influence their supply chain for perhaps their portfolio companies to embed sustainability. Well, one element is the stick, and perhaps that's the compliance piece per se. You need to comply with the tender, you need to provide this information, or you're legally obliged because of the size to provide a SECR report and attach that to your audited accounts. But the reality is, compliance is only moving in one direction. And at the moment, there is a stage which is enabling you to put in place the methodology, put in place that carbon reduction plan without it being too onerous in the context of the data provision that you're providing at this initial stage. But that obligation is only going to go one way. And so, getting your ship in order and starting to build a program on a multi-year basis means that you will be ready for those obligations as they become more onerous. But critically, in terms of influence, the area that gains the most engagement with your supply chain, with your value chain, is around how you can support them to benefit from this transition. And we really do believe that the best impact is to talk to your partners, your fellow directors, around what are the values and that matter to them. And that's on a broader ESG perspective. Is it around their local community? Is it around equality? Is it around sustainability? And if you can embed change that is aligned with individual companies' values, then you really are building a point of difference within the culture of that business, and that impacts the performance of that business. Secondly, we've been talking about revenue protection here, a ticket to play. But actually, if you lean in and look at your business model and embed ESG and sustainability, there is the position where you can generate competitive advantage. So for those that don't want to be compliant, those that don't want to do this at the highest standard, actually, if you do, you create the opportunity to win more business, to culturally change, to attract the best talent and retain the best talent, and ultimately to professionalize your business through good governance and good practices, which builds your reputation, your brand equity, and provides an opportunity for you to sustain, significant performance now and in the future. And it's that type of dialogue, and it's those sorts of webinars that we host, it's those sorts of supplier seminars that we attend that really enables people to come on board and see the benefit of this alongside those efficiency gains, cost savings, but primarily then also showing them that they can do this in a very slick, simple and effective way, and can do it with a way that mitigates the risks and the time pressures that they fear are there. So very, very important to not just focus on compliance, but focus on values and focus on broader benefits. Next slide, please.
I don't know if
Finley, do you want to say something? Sorry, there's a hand raised there.
No, sorry, guys. Ignore me.
All right,
Oh.
so no, we'll wave. Nice to see you. Yeah, so I mean, what does that actually mean? So again, here's a few stats from these are global stats, not just UK stats, from people like PwC, McKinsey, and Deloitte. And we're a B Corp business. We're great believers in businesses that are embedded around purpose and as well as growth. And actually, we're seeing that you get 4 times more engagement from employees on purpose-driven companies. You get a 5 times higher rate of growth if you're a B Corp than a traditional business, based around this transition. And I know this is a very commercial point, but I will make it, because the transition to a sustainable society, ultimately, it's an industrial revolution. It's alongside things like artificial intelligence. These are some of the biggest sea change shifts that we're going to see over the next decades. And you either come on board with that and leverage it to your advantage, or you get left behind. And these statistics are evidencing exactly that. So yeah, really, really powerful, but really, really important that people look sort of strategically at the long term as well as the short term compliance needs. Next slide, please. So the other theme I just wanted to highlight as part of this whole thesis around requesting and being asked to be compliant is, how do you turn it into a direct advantage alongside the themes that we've talked about? And one of the points for us that we actually learned through lots of engagement with our clients was, putting in place great governance, putting in place really high quality project planning tools, putting in place outcomes that are very data led is great. But there was the odd director that said to us, and so what? What does that mean for us? And so taking this compliance requirement and turning it into something that is useful, I think, is the best way to get the engagement. So can you, as part of PPN 0621, can you, based around what you've been asked to provide and articulate and put on your website, can we turn that into a branded report for that supplier that they can use with their prospects, with their employees, with their suppliers, with their stakeholders? And utilizing that document, can they use that with their investors to get enhanced margins from their banks on loans? Can they do that to protect their value and even enhance their value when they're looking to evidence their approach to ESG when they're talking to investors in the future? And we believe the answer to that is yes. So taking something that's an ask into a benefit, such as an external branded report that provides supporting collateral for broader reasons, is really, really beneficial if that can be done as part of this process.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is, you might get started on this journey for a government contract. It might be that first request that you get in, but actually there are so many customers that are going to start asking the same questions. And we see it time and time again with our clients, that they'll get some questions from one customer, another from another. And actually, they're all asking the same things in slightly different ways. So the whole idea about building this branded report out is that you have this one kind of single document that answers every question for kind of every request that you're going to get through. That can sit on your website, and you just have it there to respond in an instant. And it kind of shows that you are leading on this, that you're ready. It's not kind of a rush to answer those questions back and fill in a form and quickly measure a carbon footprint. It's about being ahead of the curve and being prepared.
And bringing that to life, we've got large insurers looking at their clients' emissions. We've got large grocers looking at their supply chain. We've got funders looking at their portfolio companies. We've got, large pharmaceutical companies looking at their supply chain as well. I mean, this is fantastic. This has been, if you're passionate about carbon reductions, as we are, it's great that we're seeing the NHS and central government put this in play. But this is not just a central government NHS point, this is happening across the full spectrum of every sector, and so it's something that everybody's going to have to get comfortable with over time. Yeah. Next slide, please. So I think this last slide is really about so how do you build the confidence to articulate these and produce these stakeholder reports in a way that avoids the fear of greenwashing, the fear of overstatement, the fear of criticism. And for us, with the experience that we've found, it starts and finishes with data in a way. So actually evidencing your outcomes by proving that you've reduced your footprints is really, really important. There's lots of businesses that have done amazing things, but they haven't actually pulled together in a full operational perspective the reductions that they've achieved. So build credibility through evidence and data is the first point. Secondly, be transparent and be specific. So when we talk about be transparent, if you're looking at a multi-year strategy, it needs to be realistic and achievable for the scale of your business and your other priorities. So we always advise that you set out at least a 3-year plan, which says this is what we've done, this is what we're doing, and this is what we're going to do. And through that, you're articulating what you're not doing as well, which is just as important as what you are doing. So being transparent is really, really key. And then be specific. Our platform, we align a lot of our services, and by the way, there's lots of other platforms and consultants out there, but we work very closely with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for example. So we align with science-based targets. We'll align with leading accreditations or leading certifications, and actually that does build credibility, and the standards there are really important. So identifying key initiatives that are credible, that specifically you've committed to, and making sure that you follow up and you show progress and you are constantly evaluating through project planning tools and engagement with the right parties is key. Creating engagement strategies is massive. So, if we're talking about travel and commute, one of the biggest areas that you can reduce your footprint around, it's really, really important that you bring your employees with you. And this is a key theme around culture, surveying those employees, building green teams, engaging them about what activity they want to see, asking them to recommend things, taking responsibilities for their departments. Because, when you build a project plan for an SME and you've got one individual who's, it's a third of their day job to do this, they need to be able to allocate to HR, to procurement, to facilities, to the travel teams, whoever it may be, to allocate roles and responsibilities to get everybody on board. And that engagement involves education and it involves prioritization. And then, this continual reporting of progress is really, really key. And as part of that, being very clear that you're going to enhance your data as you go, because this comes back to Charlotte's point about your baseline. If you just do your operational footprint to start with, once you start moving towards your value chain and your supply chain, your data will be refined and become much, much more sophisticated, and that will need you to reset your baseline. Now, if you're talking about that and you're clear that you've only done your operational footprint and there will be this change and this will require you to reset, then that's actually the best approach, the recognized strategy to take. But articulating that within your reports early then takes away any sort of nervousness or sense of pressure around it as well. So for us, these are the key themes to enable you to feel empowered to build your strategy internally, to get your employees on board, to get your C-suite engagement right, to align it to your commercial and business plan goals, to be really confident about your short and medium term strategy, and then to be able to articulate that with data externally is what we believe is the best methodology to really feel confident about your sustainability journey and feel really confident that you can take your requirements in the PPN 0621 and your carbon reduction plans and utilize them for significant benefits and advantages as well. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. I hope you found that useful. I think we'll be handing back to Finlay in a minute just for the Q&A. But from our perspective, with sustainability, with PPN 06, it can very much be a gateway solution for many, many customers, many, many clients. But the opportunity then is that gateway solution is a start of their sustainability strategy, which over time can be sincerely, be embedded and even form part of business model adaptations, which provides those commercial advantages as well. And those that lean into this early and take the best advantage of it will be best placed to win within their sectors, particularly if they operate in public sectors or healthcare sectors as well. So thank you. Hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, back to Finlay in the context of Q&A.
Thank you very much indeed, guys. I'm going to ask. There we go. I can do it myself. I've been. Give me a thumbs up if you can see me. Am I back? I'm back. There we go. I mean, it's not that important to see me, but there we go. Thank you ever so much, guys. Really appreciate that. Great, really comprehensive. Thanks ever so much. So we're going to move over to the Q&A now. We have got some questions flowing in. Just as a reminder for our audience, there's a Q&A. If you just hover over the bottom, I think most people are quite familiar with the Zoom format, but if you hover over the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A pop up. Add your questions for John and Charlotte within that, and we will get them over to the team. We've got just over 20 minutes left. So guys, thanks again. Very comprehensive presentation. So I think we've got a couple of questions in which I'm going to put to you, but I'm just curious to ask now, because one thing struck me from your presentation is, I think, John, you said this is a ticket to play. But of course, there's a lot of considerations when awarding a contract. And so, how serious should organizations be taking this? I mean, how much significance is likely to be put on an organization's carbon reduction plan when it comes to winning bids?
I think it's an evolving market. I think it's a really good question. I think John Carr's asked a very, very similar question on the Q&A. I think at the moment, I always sort of talk about compliance from my old background as a lawyer and say, has it got teeth? So, what is the consequence? Are there penalties as a result of this? And classically in all compliance offerings, the initial sanctions are pretty light, and I think that's where we are. And I don't think it'd be flawed to say otherwise. So, the obligation to put in place on your website a measurement of your footprint and state what your carbon reduction plan is really your framework. And therefore, you're not yet being held to account on the execution of that and delivering those outcomes. You're simply having to have in place a strategy and a commitment and a measurement. So I would say that that's deliberate, because that enables suppliers time to actually put in place a genuinely thought through and considered plan that they are prepared to execute. So at the moment, I would say there's some teeth, because you have to meet the obligations that are there. And if you don't, there will be consequences for it. But over time, the noise and the mood music, the reality is this is going to become much, much more onerous, both in terms of data quality and secondly, driven outcomes and evidence of reductions. So we have a bit of time, but the pressure is certainly building, and it will only get more significant as time goes on.
Charlotte, have you got anything to add? Or I saw your...
No, I think John really covered it. So I think, there is obviously that requirement, and it's not us that's kind of reviewing these forms. So it is one of the requirements. It's a tick box. It's a yes, no. Have they got this on their website? We can see that on the form. It is, of course, kind of part of a wider piece. There's also considerations around social value and lots of other bits and pieces. But I think, like John said, it is only going to grow. And it's not just in terms of the government contracts, right? If you've got other key customers, you don't quite know how they're weighting it. Some people, this is kind of right at the top of their list. So there's lots of considerations at play.
All right, thank you ever so much. And you mentioned John Carr then. So John, I did see your question. We kind of, and I think that John answered that within that. So that was generally, John's question was about the, again, these government commitments are statutory, but what are the sanctions? And I think, John, you covered off that pretty well there in your answer. So thank you very much. So again, moving over to because again, when you were talking about this in the presentation, it sort of struck me that perhaps PPN 0621 isn't necessarily that well, not many people necessarily within the organisation know about it, and I'm just curious to know how well this is being communicated within organisations, if it is really that important. If you've got to make a public commitment on your website around your carbon reduction plan, if it's that important, how much noise generally are organisations making about this, and how are they communicating that within businesses?
I think it varies. I mean, we've been. I'll give an example of sort of I suppose the weighting of how significant this is becoming. So we work with compliance firms that do lots of ISOs. We work with procurement firms that help procure contracts for suppliers into central government and local authorities. And we've got a lot of those organisations coming to us saying, we've been waiting, but now it's here and it's real. And so I think the weight of the requirement is I think second half of 2024, it feels really, really real that people need to do this, and it's seen as critical to be able to provide a full service if you're a business that operates within compliance, or you're a business that operates in supporting suppliers to contract from these parties. So yeah, I think that is live, and that is where the market is. I still think there's a lot of education anyway. I think that education is happening at multi levels, and I think the NHS itself is doing a great job with that, as is the government. But it's coming. So I feel we've crossed the Rubicon, quite frankly, and I think it's there, and people are required to do it, and the market is accepting it. It's interesting, isn't it? Is this compliance or is this commercial pressure? Which is it? And I think for this type of arrangement, PPN 0621, it's a commercial pressure, but it's quite a simple one, being blunt, to do. Sustainability is complex, but this is an entry product, an entry requirement, because it's not about driving evidence-based outcomes quite yet, because it's so new. It's really about measurement and planning. And you can do that with automated solutions and a bit of advice. So, that's why it's quite, we've crossed the Rubicon, it's live, but it's not too onerous in terms of meeting those initial obligations, which means it can get that mass adoption, which is encouraging.
Okay. And I suppose we've kind of now moving over to what makes up the carbon reduction plan. So, I mean, to what extent will procurement teams consider carbon reduction plans at kind of an individual category level, whether we're breaking emissions down by scopes, or then when we start to look at those 5 categories of scope 3, how much scrutiny is going to be put on those at an individual level? Or is it more kind of, I suppose in order to achieve the stated targets, or is it more about the overall target?
So I think it's almost about, where you want to sit, if it's really coming in at that compliance piece. So if you literally are just trying to comply with PPN 0621, what you need is a carbon reduction plan that addresses some of those key hotspots, and you can literally just stay out a couple of actions, and that almost suffices for the template. But actually, when you're trying to really make this something quite meaningful, where you can extract business value, this is when it's kind of much preferable to be a lot more targeted, and really consider, what am I going to do about my commuting emissions? What am I going to do about business travel? I can see in business travel, it's flights that's causing up the majority of that. What am I going to do about those flights? And start to set actions based on those. But I think, kind of at the top level, just to comply with PPN 0621, you don't need to go into that level of granularity. But it's really about kind of getting the most of it right, and to actually reach those net zero targets and not commit to them. These are questions that you will have to consider at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, we get requests, which is we're doing a tender within 10 days and it's the procurement team saying we need support. Or we've got the CEO saying, look, this is strategically our market. This is really important, but actually we really want to take full advantage of embedding sustainability in what we do. So that initial discussion with prospects or leads and understanding what's the driver's eyes is absolutely the pivotal part of this. The PPN for the requirement is, as you said, Finley, is really clear. So, you are having to sort of specifically set out those categories and be really clear what you're doing. But as we've touched upon, if you're looking to reduce your footprint by 6-7% per annum, you could do that with a handful of actions, and go to those typical areas for levers where you can drive that benefit if you're just seeking to hit that objective.
And so I suppose then going back to what you were talking about, we've got the 2050 target, we've got your interim targets, which are often going to be 2030. But, do the actions that align with those reduction targets need to be realistic, achievable, measurable? Or because you mentioned there, you use commuting as an example, and we'll probably move over to that as we conclude. But, we know that it's one thing to say, oh, well, we're going to put in, say, a few EV charging points and we'll set up a salary sacrifice scheme for cyclists, for instance. But, do organisations need to be more considered about how they approach this in terms of realistic targets, achievable targets that they can measure as the years move towards those interim targets?
I think so. To your point, and Charlotte, please chip in, but that pressure of I've got this tender, I've got 10 days, I just need to get it done is frustrating. It can be a bit frustrating, being candid, because businesses like yours and many businesses we work with, they understand that the importance is that this has to be embedded within people's business models. So they have to think about their budgets. They have to think about return on investments. They have to think about where the levers are that they can really drive change, which enables them to also achieve their broader goals, but also satisfy their compliance requirements. And that takes a bit of thought, and it takes senior engagement. So the ideal definitely is you plan towards this, you spend a bit of time, and it becomes part of your business model. And so you're spot on with that debate. We'd always recommend that clients come to us sort of with ideally, a sort of 3-month window. It doesn't mean it's not impossible to move at a faster pace, but that 3-month window falls as a post event strategy. If you've had to do it quickly, you've done it, and we've got lots of people have lots of experiences about what they can do to sort of define that first 6%, but actually really working on it post to build a strategy and a framework is key.
Yeah, and I think I would probably just add, in terms of setting those realistic actions, it almost goes back to that greenwashing piece. Like, these actions have to be achievable by your business. So we really try to think about it in almost that phased approach. And, it might be that right now it's not the right year. So going back to what John was talking about, almost those spheres of influence, what is it that you can actually do right now? What's kind of practical and commercially viable for the business? It's not writing down some actions that are just going to cost you, tens of thousands of pounds that you just don't have the budget for right now. It's really thinking about what can you do right now, and those things that are going to be, maybe require a little bit more upfront investment, starting to think about phasing those and planning for those, so that you will be able to achieve them kind of in the right year, but not just scribbling some actions down, just to kind of get through.
So this would, I suppose we were talking earlier, we opened the Q&A talking about, does this have teeth, for instance? But I'm also just curious to know, aside from the regulatory piece, just actually when we consider, because I was struck by your slides, what's driving net zero action for businesses, and when you talked about competitive advantage in there. So, for instance, if a competitor has a more comprehensive carbon reduction plan, but are there risks to that, for instance?
I think the competitive advantage is around how you go to market in terms of your sector. So, we work with a lot of investors and asset managers, and it's interesting that their view is that the competitive advantages for businesses tend to be two-tiered. It still is what's going to drive revenue, what's going to enhance margin, what's going to put sustainable business models in place. But underneath that, the second tier level, there's just professionalization of those businesses. There's having a point of differentiation that you can go to market with that's relatable and appropriate for your customer set. There's looking at travel, there's looking at energy consumption, looking at cost saving opportunities that generates more margin. There's good governance, good education, there's cultural buy-in. These themes all drive growth, margin, and differentiation. And sort of, if you look at how the market's evolved, two very brief examples. You've got fast fashion businesses that are really struggling at the moment because the consumers that sort of look at those businesses don't want to buy things that have been traveled across the world and they only wear once and throw away. That is a business model change or a market change to what historically has been very successful as a sector. You've got the other examples, which is waste. Businesses have gone from waste to landfill, have become quite unpopular in terms of investors. But waste to energy, transitioning your business to waste to energy, where you're actually providing renewable power, is transformed to create huge opportunities. And those business models that have adapted and changed have created enormous value for them and staggering growth. And so there's a broader view here around strategy. And we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about compliance. But the point is, there's points of differentiation. If you really look at your business and say, where do I need to be in 10 years' time? I would bet that ESG would be a key pillar as part of that decision making.
Cheers so much, John. We've got a question here from Claire Galloway, who says that we account for supply chain based on total spend, but this doesn't allow the capture of good practice or bad. Do you have preferred process to account for supply chain emissions?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a constantly evolving space, actually. But I think, we tend to think about it again on that kind of phased basis. So it's really important, like we talked about earlier, just to get started, and actually using that spend is a great place to kind of start to identify maybe where the key emission hotspots are, so that you can actually really try and create a focused plan to collect better data in the specific areas of your supply chain where it's going to have a material impact, or, where you think it really matters. So not kind of trying to get started with the absolute perfect data from kind of step one. So we start with that spend based, and then, it's really about supplier engagement from then. So trying to think about, targeting the correct suppliers, thinking about if you want to maybe survey them just to understand, are they measuring a carbon footprint? Have they got a net zero plan? The kind of things that, you're actually being asked. If you can start to understand if they're on that same journey, then actually you can probably bet that they're going to be tracking down with you over time. So it's really about that understanding up front, and then ultimately, starting to collect data from them on their kind of overall GHG emissions, so that you can apportion your almost section of that, or maybe even a kind of a footprint for the particular product or service that you've purchased over time is the ultimate aim. But it's really about taking that phased approach and being quite targeted so that it doesn't become kind of overly cumbersome for the procurement teams or for the measurement teams or whoever it is that's kind of tackling this project and trying to do it in a step-by-step way.
And our driver for everyone is based around outcomes. You have to start with measurement to make an informed choice, but the data refinement comes from the broad data you have. But if we can talking about good practices, if we can really help those organizations use that data, refine that data, but then drive their own carbon reduction strategies around it and evidence to them the benefits to them, we're all winning. So I think Claire's spot on. I think you start with that data provision, but then how do you lean in and then use that to refine the areas that that are most relevant to you and your business as a supplier, but also how you can support them to see carbon reduction as an opportunity.
Nathan Goodfriend has asked here that he's wondering how investments are assessed within Scope 3, and I suppose is that something that would be relevant here in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a category within Scope 3, it's category 15, which is just called investments, which accounts for exactly that. So it's absolutely right that investors are kind of held to account in where they're placing those investment decisions, and they'll take almost their proportionate share based on that investment value into that asset or that business or whatever it may be. But kind of for the purpose of PPN 0621, that's outside of scope, and generally just because it's actually really difficult to collect the data, depending on kind of how far reaching your investment strategy and process is. There could be hundreds of thousands of assets, so there's quite a lot to go in there. It's a big data game, investments. So it absolutely should be accounted for, and it's right, but it's again taking that phased approach, a bit like how we were talking with the supply chain, maybe starting with some revenue factors or some generic asset factors just to get started, working out where the big hitting items are and start to collect better data there.
Just looking at commuting specifically, because I suppose it's quite unique in the sense that, if the business is growing, headcount is growing, then number of people driving alone to work in an ICE vehicle is likely to grow. And so it is something which can grow over time. So I suppose, we can certainly give our advice on that. But actually, when we're looking at the categories of scope 3, do you need to be accounting for things like that? Is there any sort of generalized advice that you can put towards organizations when they see that the emissions in certain categories might be changing whilst they're on that growth journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we work with loads of businesses, that are growing businesses. And I think it's almost important to think about what those KPIs are and kind of what targets it is that you want to set. You can think about your emissions on an absolute basis, but you can also think about them on an intensity basis. And, particularly for SMEs who are growing businesses, that's kind of recognized in the SBTi guidance that you can start to think about scope 3 on that intensity basis. And when I say intensity, it's thinking about kind of that absolute carbon footprint divided by some kind of unit of measure. So that might be FTE, it might be headcount, it might be £1 million turnover. There's loads of different metrics that you could take. So it's deciding what is kind of a representative and useful metric for your business and tracking that in addition to the absolute emissions, particularly, for stuff like commuting and business travel. But then I guess going back to kind of embedding it in the business, as the business is growing, are you thinking about sustainability when you're making decisions? So if you're going to open a new office, are you thinking about the transport links, while you're growing, making sure that's kind of embedded in that decision making as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got great examples of where we've actually been brought in and commissioned to do work on where there is considerations for a site move and actually how is that going to play into emissions reduction around commuting? So, but just to kind of, without going off on a different topic, as you mentioned SMEs there, and John Carr's got a question here around SMEs and saying, are they at a disadvantage when competing for, Crown contracts?
I don't think so. I think, provided, I think they're at a disadvantage of knowing where solutions are that enable them to do this robustly. So I think there's lots of really high quality consultancy firms, lots of organizations that can support with enterprise and, help deliver this in a really constructive and productive way. For SMEs, there's less obvious choices out there. And there's also, so I think the research and understanding who the right partners are is really, really key. And I think, for the clients that are looking at their supply chains, whether it's central government, local authority, or whether it's large enterprises, if they can provide guidance of or a panel or whatever they think's best to provide choice for SMEs, I think that's the important point, because that gives people access to the tools that they need. And so if that's done, I think SMEs can really, take advantage of this. And there's a lot of support for SMEs within the central government. And I think it's a key pillar for them to ensure that they are supporting young businesses coming through as well. So if they get that right, it's doable.
Brilliant. We're more or less at the end now. It's gone quite quickly, so we're going to kind of wrap it up shortly. Thanks ever so much for all of your questions, everyone. Just kind of like to just leave, if you've got any kind of final comments just on, what general advice you could provide to organizations when putting together their carbon reduction plans and how they can really help to measure, monitor their emissions with those scopes 1, 2, and 5 categories of scope 3. And then maybe just to conclude, should our attendees want to contact you guys at Flotilla, a little bit more on how they can get in touch with you.
Great. Thanks, Finley. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to you, Finley. Thank you to Mobility Ways. Thank you for those that have attended. I do think, answering your specific question on how do people, start, just get started. To the point about the teeth within the compliance piece, people are understanding that we're in the foothills of this journey, and people need to build their knowledge, build their understanding, and then execute a plan well. So just get started. Don't worry. Work with the data you have now, but choose partners that you trust, ensure you've diligenced them, reference them, and make sure that you understand that the full service you're going to get as part of that. Also, secondly, choose partners that understand your commercial goals as well, is my other point, because detaching your purpose-led strategy from your business-led strategy results in failure. So just look for partners that get your business model, get you, and understand that that they understand what you're looking for. And then finally, just remember this is only going to go one way. So, have one eye on building a framework that enables you to leverage the advantage of this over time to really win out is what I'd say. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything, Charlotte. But
no, I think it's absolutely right. I think it's getting started. The first step is always the hardest, and then you can reassess, we can restate that baseline, we can start to pull in more pieces of data. It's just getting that first view that can then start to inform an action plan and taking it all from there.
And finally, we'd love anyone who found it useful or thought that was of interest. We're here to we call it Flotilla because it's about everybody coming together to make a difference. So it's not about choose the right partner for you, for goodness sake. But if this has been useful and you'd love to reach out, our website's www.flotillaworld.com. It's j.rastrick@flotillaworld.com. It's
c.hallowell@flotillaworld.com. I think they were on the slides as well.
Yeah, just reach out, and we're here to help us all try and make a bit of a difference, aren't we? So it'd be great if we can.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, guys, and thank you all for attending. We've just gone over by a minute, so forgive me if you've got your lunch waiting for you or another call you're supposed to be getting on. Any questions we didn't answer, I'll get onto those now and send those over to John and Charlotte for them to maybe add one or two lines. We will be sharing around these slides, and a recording of this video will be on the Mobility Ways YouTube channel alongside the rest of the videos in our Thought Leader series. So I'd implore you, get on there, have a look at what else we've got, and keep an eye out for your email for future events coming up. So just leaves me to say, John, Charlotte, thank you ever so much. Really, really insightful. Been great having you along. Thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.